Hello Internet and welcome to my channel. I'm Henrik Hjelte and this is the story about building a foldable boat. In this video we will test out different glues to see which one will serve our purposes best. I want to be able to join this yellow PVC tarp to itself and also to wood as good as possible. I cut out a larger piece of PVC tarp that in the boat will be used as the hinging mechanism between the plywood sheets. I now measure out a 5 cm part that I can use to sand easily before I cut it up into smaller strips. Here I'm measuring the middle of the part so I can cut out 2 equal pieces. The sanding is done with an 80 grit sandpaper, and this is done so that the glue will have an easier time to adhere to the more rough surface. Now that both pieces has been sanded, it's time to measure out the 3 cm test strips and then cut them out. And these are the glues I will be using. Here is epoxy, universal glue, contact cement and rubber fix. I have marked the different glues with different letters. So epoxy is Z, universal glue is D, contact cement is K and rubber fix is R. On the left side I will be gluing the PVC tarp to itself, and on the right side I will be gluing the PVC tarp to the wood. The first glue is the rubber fix, and I'm spreading it with a spatula with small spikes to make sure that the thickness is even. This glue is meant for repairing inflatable boats and rubber boots, so I have good hopes for this being a good glue. When I put pressure on the glue joints, I use a clamp to make sure that there is an even pressure amongst all the glue joints. It will not only be the hinges in the boat I will be using this PVC tarp. I'm also gonna use it to make inflation bags to make sure if I accidentally capsize the boat that it will not sink. To be able to fill the inflation bags I need a valve. So I ordered some from China and they will be arriving in about a month. The rubber fix dries pretty quickly, but it takes 48 hours to be able to get it to full strength. In this test the rubber fix got a drying time of 6 days. I messed up a little when clamping down the rubber fix sample, so they glided a little bit, but I don't think that affected the result too much. To make sure everything stays put when I glue the real boat, I'm gonna use stainless staples. Now it's time to use the universal glue. It actually says on the tube that it supports both wood and PVC, so it might be a good candidate. I could not find any text about how long it would take to get it to full strength, but I left it for 6 days, so that should hopefully be enough. The universal glue samples were clamped together with the rubber fixed samples. While we wait for the gluing process, I think we should talk a little bit about the next episode before continuing. In the next episode, I will do a 3D model of the boat and the rigging and the sails. When you're gluing down and clamping, it's a good thing to have plastic wrap around the parts that you don't want to glue down. Next up we have contact cement. On the box we can read that it's made to do wood and also plastic and lots of other things. So it might work on this. So when you're using contact cement, you don't use this as a normal glue where you put the areas together directly, but you actually let them dry separately until they're not tacky anymore. And then you can press them together. That way it's easier to align complex shapes and things like that, because you only need to press for a short while. In this test I let the glue dry separately until it was not tacky anymore. Then I put it in a clamp, just like with the other samples, and I left it there for 5 days. Now it's time for the epoxy. Here I use a scale to be able to measure out the exact same amount of both the glue and the hardener, because that's how this glue is supposed to be mixed. I use a very sensitive scale and measure out 2 grams of the glue and 2 grams of the hardener to make a total of 4 grams of glue. I use a small bag on top of a wooden cutting board, and then I mix it for a long time before using it to actually glue something. I use a new fresh popsicle stick to make sure I don't have any unmixed glue when applying it to the parts. It's actually quite annoying to use the epoxy compared to the other glues, because you need to mix the epoxy very well. I let the epoxy dry for 5 days. And now for the testing parts. I will start out with the epoxy. You can see it bends a little bit stiff. It will be totally impossible for me to pull it apart like this. When I actually try to peel it like this, it comes apart with some resistance, but not very much. I don't need to apply very much force at all to do the peeling of the rest of the strip. Here I'm testing the PVC tarp glued to wood. I can quite easily just peel the PVC tarp off, and you can see that the glue actually let go of the PVC tarp. Now it's time for the universal glue. When peeling the 2 PVC cloths from each other, it makes a little bit of resistance, maybe a little bit more than the epoxy, but it's quite easy still to get it away. Now it's time for the universal glue between wood and the PVC cloth. When I pull the first one here, you can see that a little piece of wood actually sticks to the cloth. I think this is a little bit of a easier part of the wood that I actually get with, so I don't take too much account into it, but it's actually quite strong. The second one does not get any wood with it. Now it's time for the contact cement. It peels quite easily, maybe a little bit easier than the epoxy, but not much easier. Peeling the PVC tarp off the wood with the contact cement is maybe a little bit easier than the epoxy, but not very much at all. Now it's time for the rubber fix. This is actually a glue that is specifically made for this type of PVC cloth, so I'm hoping it will perform quite well. It's actually quite hard for me to get the first part of it loose. Once I actually have the first part loose and I get a grip, it peels with a lot more force than the other, but it's still possible to do it with just my hands. Now it's time to see the PVC cloth glued to wood using the rubber fix. And here you can see that we actually tear out the wood, and it takes quite a lot of force. Way more than the others to actually get it loose. So if you need to use glue to adhere the PVC tarp to wood or to itself, I would definitely recommend using the rubber fix. And now we're gonna look at the last way of attaching PVC tarp to itself, and that's heat. So I used a heat gun to increase the temperature of the PVC tarps up to 150 degrees. Maybe I should have done a little bit more, I'm not 100% sure, but it seemed to have worked very well. And then I just waited for the PVC tarp to cool down again. Once it hit 30 degrees, I thought it was close enough to room temperature to do the test. So here we go. I first tried with my fingers and I couldn't get it to move at all. I used one plier, it was not enough. I had to use 2 pliers to actually be able to pull it apart because I couldn't apply enough force without it. So in summary, if you want to glue the PVC tarps to something else, use the rubber fix. And if you want to adhere it to itself, I would definitely recommend using heat. Thank you for watching and hit that subscribe button, and I hope to see you in the next part.